Thank you very much for having me. I am so pleased to be here. So I'm going to be talking today about some work I've done that evaluates what happened after California introduced these associate degrees for transfer. So I'm going to go through a little history and then get into exactly what I did and what we found. But I'm grateful to be here and grateful that McCall is here. She was on my dissertation committee and has read this paper more times than anyone other than me, probably. So I am grateful for her feedback and for inviting me here. Before I start, I want to just thank, I have been working really closely with a community college district, which I have kept anonymous today, though possibly not, because now I just put names up there. But these are the people in the institutional research office there who have been incredible collaborators the whole time and have been such good partners for me. And I sent them this slide, and then I think they were embarrassed and didn't want me to put it up, but I wanted to anyway. And Elaine Kuo is not available on the internet. You cannot find her anywhere. So I have Maria standing in for her, but she has been one of my great partners. I don't think this will be a surprise for anyone, but of the 28 million students enrolled in post-secondary institutions in the United States, 40% of them are enrolled in public two-year schools and community colleges. In California, that number is over 60%. California has the highest and the largest community college system. 1/4 of all community college students in the country are enrolled in California community colleges. It's this amazingly important system. And California has a higher proportion of its higher ed students, college students enrolled in community colleges than any other state. And since 1960, across the country, enrollments in college have been increasing really rapidly. And most of that growth has happened in the community college sector. So this is the fastest growing sector, and it's growing kind of more quickly than any other sector of higher education, particularly in California. Community college students don't look like four-year students across the board. So this is of college goers, what proportion of them start at a community college? These are national numbers. But low-income students who go to college are much more likely than their high-income peers to start at a community college. Students whose parents did not go to college are much more likely than students whose parents did go to college to start at a community college. And there are differences in races of who goes to a four-year and who goes to a two-year school. So I think this is important because these are national numbers, but it looks relatively similar in California. And it's important because the students who have been most traditionally disadvantaged by higher education are disproportionately enrolled in two-year schools and thus really reliant on the transfer process to get a bachelor's degree. So paying attention to how easy we make it to transfer from a two-year to four-year school is important if we want an educated citizenry, if we want kind of people involved in democracy, but particularly because our traditionally disadvantaged students are enrolled in these schools at really higher rates. So then the question is, how do they do once they're there? This is, again, is national data, but students surveyed starting at a community college, over 80% of them say, and this is, we can argue a little bit about the numbers because it's important who you ask and how you ask, but most students say that they want to end up with a bachelor's degree. So when they start, about 82% of students say that their goal is to end up with a bachelor's degree or above. 6 years later, so 6 years after what we call a two-year degree, less than 12% of them have a bachelor's degree. Another 20-something% have an associate's degree or a certificate, and over 40%, like 46% of students are no longer enrolled and did not earn any credential. So this is, there are reasons to think that maybe some of these students left for reasons that we would all think are totally fine and we would support societally, individually. But there's a really big difference there with students who say they want to get a bachelor's degree and the number who actually do. And some of these students, I think we could all agree, are leaving for reasons that we don't support, that we don't think are good for them or good for the country or the state. So then why? What's going on? Why are the students leaving? I'm going to be super quick here, but this is kind of grounded in 3 different theories of research. So the first is from economics, and the Becker's human capital theory basically says that students will stay enrolled so long as the costs as they perceive them are lower than what they perceive the benefits to be. And costs, can be financial, tuition, fees, all those things, but also can be other things, emotional or kind of psychic costs. The cost of being enrolled, how does that make you feel about yourself? What kind of decisions are you being forced to make? Those kind of things. And when those costs are higher than what they perceive the benefits to be, then students will drop out. That's the theory. Vincent Tinto in the 70s and until quite recently had added to this theory. So for a long time, we thought about students dropping out only kind of based on individual factors. Why are students not staying enrolled? What about their educational history? What about their own personal traits is causing them to drop out? And he really kind of tipped that and said, well, we really need to think about this as an interactive process between schools and students. What about schools are leading students to drop out? And what about students, and how are those two things interacting? What is it? And he kind of talked about student integration, academic and social integration into an institution. Recently, Judy Scott Clayton has popularized what I think a couple of people have been thinking about, kind of the structure hypothesis. So there are things about schools, the very explicit policies and procedures, but also kind of less obvious things, norms and nudges that students are experiencing that can both affect their ability to feel like they're integrated into the school academically or socially. It can also increase the costs. So if there are things that are happening in schools that make students feel like it's very costly to stay enrolled, then that could lead students to drop out. And her theory, as she's put it, and I think a lot of people agree with this, is that programs that are very tightly and explicitly structured with very few opportunities for students to diverge unintentionally and that have very few bureaucratic obstacles will lead students to stay enrolled longer. So kind of thinking about how we structure programs to not give students lots of opportunities to diverge from a path. She put, I think, the best way that this really helped me to think about things. So she used a quote from Mark Twain that said, navigating one's way to a degree in a two-year school in a community college is akin to navigating a shapeless river on a moonless night. So I think that's evocative for me for two reasons. One, you can imagine you can't really see where you're going, right? Like you can't see the end goal necessarily. You don't know what you're heading towards, and there are no visible markers of your progress along the way. You can't keep track of, oh, I've done this, now I'm getting closer. It's really hard to see where you are in the process. And we've found that in a lot of qualitative studies, this is true. So data from California community colleges, more than 50% of students say that they're worried about making mistakes when they choose a class. Am I choosing a class that's getting me towards my goal? And this was from a study more nationally, but 42% of students said they didn't have enough information about course requirements. I don't know how to choose classes. I don't know what I need to take. And 26% of students said they didn't know which courses counted towards a degree. A couple of quotes from that second study, students were saying, this is going to hold me back. None of these classes that I took are even going to count. I didn't know that when I was taking them, but now I know that these classes don't count towards my goal. Many times you don't even know what questions to ask. You might feel like you don't know where you're going, but you don't even know what questions to ask. And I feel like I took a lot of wasted classes. So we're seeing this. Students are saying that they feel like they don't know where they're going. They don't know how to get there. I'm going to stop for 1 second. If anyone has any questions at any point, please ask. I'm happy to be interrupted to clarify things or to talk more broadly. So I'm going to situate this talk about associate degrees for transfer in California, thinking that in California there are so many choices of degrees that you can be working towards, and then once you make a decision, there are really flexible requirements for getting there. So kind of situating, thinking about this policy change, how that affected these two facets of California community colleges. So we're going to take a little detour, and now you are a student applying to a California community college. Decide you want to go. This is the enrollment screen. This is the first thing you see. You're applying to enroll. So this box, which you can't read, says what term are you applying to enroll. The second question you're asked is what do you want to major in? What do you want your degree to be? And this is 2/3 of the drop-down menu. Look how small I had to make this screen. And then this is like basically because I couldn't copy and paste enough, right? Like it just goes on and on and on and on. And you have to scroll through all these and pick, like, what do I want to do? Second question you're asked when you want to enroll. So now imagine that you have looked through all of them and decide you want to get a degree in business administration. So we're going to situate everything we talk about from here on that you've already decided you want a degree in business administration. I don't think that we should discount this first choice, right? This is a huge choice. There's so much literature that says that when we're faced with decisions, like think about going to Subway, right? They're like, what kind of bread do you want? Do you want like Italian wheat or Nova Scotian wheat or whole wheat? Or like all these choices. And then you're like, okay, do you want it toasted? And what kind of cheese do you want, right? Like I go in there, I'm like, I have no idea. Just give me one of the ones that you already picked out and said is good, right? So there's a lot of research that says when you're given way too many options, you are less sure about your choice. You feel less good about it at the end. You're much more likely to avoid or procrastinate making a choice. And then people think after you make a choice, like, that probably wasn't the best thing. So we're already putting students in a situation where we're like, there are like 1 million degrees to choose. Pick one. All right, so let's say you're going to do business administration. And you know you want to transfer to a 4-year school. So the next thing you do is go to assist.org and decide what you need to do to transfer. So if you want to go to a UC, you have like 18 choices. If you want to go to CSU, this is the first page, right? Look at how many, if you want to go to CSU Channel Islands, there are like 5 different degrees that you can go to. CSU East Bay, there are a million choices, right? So now you're like, oh my God, I have to choose where I want to go, and then conditional on that, what degree I want to get at that school. So okay, so now you've already chosen your degree, you've chosen where you want to transfer to and what degree you're going for. Next thing you do is click on that school, and it pops up these two. So I've given this talk before, and I kind of tease how old these look. This is like an audience where I probably shouldn't tease how old this looks, because people in this room might be, but like, look at this. This is really hard to read, right? Like, these are like, you're popping them up, and then you're like, oh my gosh, now I need to figure out what I want to take, looking at this like font from 1984, and then you go through, and it says, okay, if you want to take this course, that is the same as this course at your community college. So you have to figure out what courses I need to take at my school. And they're not even making that easy, because you can take Math 12 or Math 1A. You can take Econ or, right, like, so you have to do all these, like, okay, I have to take this or this. Figure it out. What ends up happening is that the degree requirements for transferring don't overlap that well. So if you want to transfer from school, community college A to CSU Chico, you need those classes. CSU East Bay, those classes, right? And the kicker is that they don't overlap with what you need to get the AA at your school. So if you are an incredibly savvy student, right, then you're going to be saying, all right, I think I want to go to one of those 4 schools. You're not guaranteed admission anywhere, right? So you need to kind of hedge your bets and apply to a couple of schools. So I need to take many, many more classes than I would. This is for a student who's really savvy, right? Like, they've already chosen what they want to do, where they want to go, and have figured out what classes they need to take. So empirically, what people saw was that students were transferring with 80 semester credits when they only need 60 on average, and then graduating with their bachelor's degree with 160 when they only need 120. Huge inefficiencies in the system, right? Like, people are picking up way more credits than they need, filling up seats in classes when we're already capacity constrained. And a quarter of students were transferring with an AA. Most students who transferred did not have an associate's degree. And then many of those students did not graduate with a BA. So they're spending 5 or 6 years in our system and having no degree to show for it. And there's a lot of research that says that having the degree is more important than having this set of courses that leads to the degree. There's a lot of kind of labor market returns that are associated with actually having the degree. So this is the system that we had set up for our students, right? Like, pretty hard to figure out what you need to do, and really building in a lot of inefficiency. Then 2012, associate degree for transfer, degreewithaguarantee.com. Like, this is a nice website, right? Like, we were just looking at those like old school printouts. Like, this rolled out, and this was a really good policy kind of at its core, but I think it was really presented well to students. So 2010 signed into law, 2012 rolled out. We have this new degree, which is the CSUs and the CCCs, the community colleges, coming together and creating degrees that say, if you take these classes at any community college, they will transfer to any CSU that offers that degree. So then we're moving from that red and green inefficiency to saying, each of these schools is going to accept those, and you're going to get an associate degree also. Much, much clearer system for students, and kind of going back to the theory, saying to students, there aren't a lot of choices here. We're telling you these are the classes you take to get this degree, and they're going to go to any CSU that offers it. Associated, also there were some students were guaranteed admission to the CSU system, not a particular campus, but to the system, and were given GPA bumps to impacted majors at impacted campuses. So this is the kind of like new regime that we're living in now, right? And so the question is then, what do we expect the effect of this to be? And I think there are a lot of things that we expect it could affect. We think maybe students will get more associate's degrees, and I think there are a couple of ways this could happen. One, the actual structure could induce students who might have otherwise dropped out to stay in the system longer and to get a degree and then transfer, right? So there could be students who would have left our system who are now going to stay in. It could also affect students who are going to transfer anyway and would have transferred, but now they're going to get an associate degree before they transfer. So we might see that there are more associate's degrees granted for a couple of different reasons. We hope it will affect the number of students who transfer. And later on, we hope it will affect the number of students who transfer and then graduate with a BA. And then third, I think this is something that wasn't implicit in this design, but it might affect the kinds of students who get these degrees or the kinds of students enrolled in these classes. And so this is kind of, are there effects on equity that we would worry about? So I'm going to walk through each of these three findings and to say, what is the effect of offering associate's degrees for transfer on student outcomes? Before I do that, I'm going to walk kind of tediously, but hopefully to get us all on the same page, through how I'm going to answer these questions. So God bless bureaucracy, because what happened was these degrees were rolled out at different campuses in different departments over time. And that's important for how I'm going to answer this question. So this is a snapshot from, I think, the end of 2014. And it shows, it's a California community college in a row, and it shows which degrees they were offering. So the blue are ADTs that are already being offered. Gold are ones that are in development, and gray is a degree that they don't offer. So you can see that there's some variation, right? Depending on the kind of backstory of how this happened was transfer that at the state level, CSUs and CCCs got together and created transfer model curricula, right? So saying these are the classes or really the content that you need to learn. This is what we think should constitute the lower division coursework in a given major. Once those were created, then schools could create their own ADT. And they did that by, at the department level, coming up with what classes in their school they needed, then sending it up to the district level, community college district level, then sending it back down to, there was like a lot of people who had to sign off on each of these, which created this kind of variability in timing of when ADTs got rolled out on campuses. It depended how fast the departments moved and how fast the district moved, right? So there was a kind of some variability in when an ADT in anthropology would come online in a given campus. So I'm going to use that to try to figure out, basically at the core, what I'm trying to do is say, if Contra Costa College, I'm trying to use a school that I've never worked with just to like keep everything anonymous. If Contra Costa College introduces an ADT in math, what is the effect on the number of degrees granted at Contra Costa in math? What I need to know is what would have happened at Contra Costa in math if they didn't offer the ADT. That's what I'm trying to get at here. What is that counterfactual? What would have happened if they hadn't offered the ADT? That's what we want to know. So we're going to try to figure that out using millions and millions of comparison groups. We're going to look at the number of degrees granted in other departments, at other colleges, in other years to try to back out what would have happened at Contra Costa in math in 2012. So the first thing I could do is just say, all right, Contra Costa starts offering an ADT in math in 2012. Let's just compare that to what happened at Contra Costa in math in 2011, right? Just look at the year before and say, any growth, we're just going to say that's because of the ADT. You should be concerned that that's not really a good comparison group because maybe Contra Costa enrollment was growing for who knows why, right? Like maybe they were just having more students, so all their departments are growing. Or maybe CSU East Bay had some capacity constraints. They weren't accepting as many students, so a lot of students are kind of starting at community colleges with the intent to transfer. Maybe the composition of students is changing. There are a lot of reasons why just looking at what happened last year isn't going to give us a really credible answer of the effect of offering ADTs. Okay, so take that into account. Now let's say, well, I know what happened in physics in 2011 and 2012, right? I have another department that doesn't offer ADTs. I'm going to use that department as a comparison group and say, great, let's look at the growth in the number of degrees granted in physics. Now your concern might be, I hope your concern would be, but math, we know math was growing faster anyways. Like for some reason, everyone's totally psyched on math these days. Terrible example, should have used like computer science or something, but like people are like really excited about math, so math is growing really fast these days. So using physics to figure out what would have happened in math, not the best. So then what I'm going to do is take another college, right? So I'm just going to use Irvine Valley or something, right? And say, let's look at the difference, compare the change in math to compare the change in physics at Irvine Valley, which doesn't offer ADTs in math or physics, and use that to say, okay, well then what would have happened in math at Contra Costa if they hadn't offered ADTs? So I'm just going to do this exact thing a million times, right? Like comparing the change in math to the change in physics at one school, to the change in math and the change in physics at another school. Do this for every possible combination of majors at all the schools, and then comparing like when math at X changes and math and Y doesn't, what is the estimated effect then of offering ADTs? That's the basic strategy there, is just doing this exact kind of subtraction a million different times to figure out. What that should take care of is anything that's particular to a given college in a given year. So like after the housing bubble burst, maybe colleges in LA County grew really fast. We're going to take care of any of those changes that would have been happening anyways. Anything that's particular to a given department in a given year. After the Facebook IPO, maybe computer science departments grew really fast. We've taken care of that. And what's left then? Department year, college year. Oh, college by department. So maybe computer science departments in Silicon Valley were growing really fast. So we're going to try to, this strategy is going to allow us to take account of all those things that are happening anyway that have nothing to do with ADTs and just isolate the effect of offering an associate degree for transfer on the number of students who are graduating with that degree. We mostly there? I know, it's like really mind-bending to like think through all this. I've talked about it so many times and I can still confuse myself. But that's basically what we're doing. It's just this triple difference design, kind of like just trying to control for anything that would have happened anyway and just isolate the effect of the ADT. So I'm going to tell you where I got the data from. Got most of my data from the Community College Chancellor's Office. This website, which has like this is the gold standard here. Like this website can give you data about anything. So I just went and got for each school the number of degrees granted in each department in each year. Only complete with the website, it times out really fast, right? So you have to be sitting at your computer jiggling your mouse 24 hours a day if you're going to get these to download. But I did that for like 6 weeks straight and got all of the degrees granted in all of the schools for about 8 years. So I could know exactly how many people graduated with an associate's in math at Irvine Valley each year. Added to that data on transfers from all of the community colleges to all of the CSUs. So this is for 2013-14, and it just has, for Cabrillo, it has how many people went to each of the different CSUs. So I look at transfer rates between each community college and each CSU. And then I have data. Oh my God, I didn't anonymize this. I'm just going to switch past that and tell you what it was. It was student level data from 2 community colleges in the Bay Area that has each student record. So it has like Rachel Baker in this term took this class. I have every class that every student took for I think 8 years, something like 2.3 million student by course observation. So I can see exact enrollment patterns for different demographic groups, exactly the classes they took. And that's going to help me to answer question number 3. Are we seeing that different kinds of students are enrolling at different rates? So first, let's look at the number of associate's degrees granted in departments that offer ADTs. Is there an effect of offering ADTs on the number of students who get these associate degrees? So here's the main finding in one pretty slide. What you have, the red dots are the estimated effect of offering the ADTs over time. So the first year that an ADT is offered, second year, and then these are confidence intervals, like are these statistically significant? So the first year that a department offers ADTs, I estimate that 6 more students graduate with an associate degree in that department. This is on a mean of 20. So that's a big effect, right? Like many, many more students, 30-something% more students graduating. Second year, even bigger. By the third year, many, many more students are graduating with an associate's degree. This is what we all wanted to see. This is what the state was trying to do, right? Induce more students to earn associate degrees in these departments. I think this raises a question, though. How is this happening? What's the mechanism behind this? And there are 3 ways that I came up with this could be happening. One, what we hope, that we're just getting more students to get degrees. Inducing students not to drop out, encouraging students to pick up an associate degree on their way to transfer. So schools will be granting more associate degrees overall. That's what we want. It could be happening, though, that this is some sort of departmental cannibalization. So math starts offering ADTs, and students switch from other departments into math. So we're not changing really who's getting a degree. We're just changing what kind of degrees they're getting. I think we wouldn't like this outcome as much, right? Like changing the departments that students are getting degrees in is less ideal than actually getting more students to get degrees. Third, and I'm going to tell you how I came up with this idea. It's not a great story. That students could be getting multiple awards in the same department, right? So I just graduate with an ADT in psychology and a local associate's degree in psychology. So I got this idea, I was presenting this work at the faculty senate of a community college, and there was a student representative on the faculty senate. So I like present this whole thing, like give everything, like everyone's like, oh my God, this is great, like we're so excited about this. And then this, 22-year-old guy raises his hand, he's like, well, I actually think I know what's happening. I think students are just getting a local associate's degree and getting an ADT at the same time. So it's the same student getting 2 awards. Like, that's not a big deal. And I was like, I didn't know that was possible, and that just ruined my entire study, right? Like, there it goes. Like, honestly, everything turned red in my head, and I was just like, I'm never gonna get a job. This is never gonna go anywhere. Like, there it goes. So I was like, wait. So I was like, okay, tell me, like, how does this happen? I really had me walk through everything. And then I'll show you what I found at the end, but then I presented this at the Intersegmental Transfer, CIAC, I can't remember what that stands for. And I told them this, and they were like, hands shot up in the room. They're like, wait, you can get a local degree and an associate degree for transfer. Like, this is really, it's actually not true that in every school you can get both degrees at the same time. So some of this is happening. It's not constant across the state. Like, there's some variability there. But some of it is that students could get multiple degrees. So we're going to look at this first question, really the first 2 questions. Is this because more students overall are getting degrees, or is this just switching between departments? That's the real question here. So how I'm going to do that is look at the school level. So this graph looks really similar to the graph I showed you before that shows the increase in degrees, but now I'm looking at this at the school level. So the y-axis is a lot different because now we're looking rather than within a department, within a school. So in what I'm calling treated departments, the departments that offer ADTs, same trend, right? In the first year, more students are getting degrees, and by the 3rd year, that's a really large increase. So we're seeing in treated departments that more students are getting degrees. Question is, who are these students? Where are they coming from? So how I'm going to look at that is the next slide I'm going to show you is departments that don't offer ADTs. So if all these students would have gotten ADTs, but they're coming from other departments, then we're going to see a lot of negative effects, right? We're going to see that the untreated departments are actually shrinking, are getting smaller over time, and that we're just moving students between departments. And we don't see that, thankfully. This doesn't seem to be a story where we're just getting students to switch which department they're getting an associate degree in. Like non-significant, really small kind of negative effects that mostly go away. So it doesn't seem like what we're doing is just moving students between departments. That doesn't seem to be the main story. And when you look at, this is number of degrees granted overall in a college as a function of if the school offers ADTs and how many it offers, we see this generally positive story that by the 3rd year, this is a significantly positive effect. So it does seem like what's happening is more students are getting associate degrees as a result of the policy. This isn't where we're just shuffling students between departments. So then I want to know, okay, but are students just is the same student getting 2 degrees, right? That's what's happening? So you can see this is from a school that I have anonymized to the point where I don't remember what it is. But this is, oh shoot, my box is wrong. Okay, I meant to have it down here. You can see that you can get a business administration AA, or you can get a business administration for transfer ADT. The school offers 2 different associate's degree in business administration, so a student could get both of them. In some schools, the course requirements are exactly the same. You take the same courses, you can pick which degree you get or get both. In some schools, the course requirements are similar, but a little bit different. In some schools, they're super different. So there's a lot of variation there, but I wanted to make sure that we weren't just seeing Rachel Baker picking up a bunch of degrees, because then that's not increasing what students are learning, right? Like, there's no human capital development there. I'm not taking new classes and learning new things. It's really a story of me just getting extra degrees, and that doesn't seem to be ideal. So how I did this was I got student level data from 2 districts, 2 kind of Bay Area districts, and then looked at how many students. So you can see that this is the same student because they have the same student ID. And in 2013, they got a certificate and an AA. Another student down here, 2013, got 2 AAs and a certificate. Same student getting 3 degrees in the same department, right? And I just looked at how many students got what I was calling duplicate awards, same department, 2 different awards in the same year. For one district, we see this really tiny change that's not significant. And then in one other district, I saw a much bigger change that was significant. So I do think that part of the story, not all of the story for sure, is that some students are just getting multiple degrees in the same department. I think that part of the increase we see is stuff like this happening. But given that many, you should have seen this room. These people were mad when they found out that some schools were giving 2 degrees in the same department with the same course requirements. So this isn't happening across California, only in some districts. And in those districts, it seems to be part of what's happening, but not entirely. So I feel pretty confident that that's not the whole story. Yeah.
I was just curious if you had an opportunity yet to probe a little deeper in terms of, I follow what you're saying. If there are two degrees in history,
Right.
an ADT and just a non-ADT associate. But it seems like there are other configurations that could be there in terms of maybe two related
Yeah.
fields.
Right. Right.
Or, and particularly when you increase the notion of certificate,
Yeah.
a very real probability that the student may be getting some type of a vocationally oriented certificate that has value outside of academia that might matter. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious about some other
I haven't done enough of that as I should. I think you're right that this kind of story here, where someone's getting a certificate and an AA, like this might be exactly what we're trying to do, right? Is get students to kind of diversify and get different degrees that can have different meaning in different worlds. I think that's right. And this, if ADTs are increasing the number of students who do have this kind of outcome, then that might be a really positive outcome for the state and for individuals. So you're right that I haven't actually dug into that as much as I should, and that's a good point. I will definitely do that. One point that I don't have in here that I thought was really interesting was I started to think, how is this going to affect certificates? Are students going to be getting fewer certificates? And you come up with stories why that is, or more certificates, right? Like what we're doing is kind of putting this notion into the culture that getting an award matters, that getting an associate's degree before you transfer matters, right? We're like kind of putting new ideas into these schools. And so I was thinking, what would the effect on certificates be then? Are we going to induce more students to get certificates because we're kind of saying getting a degree matters? So I looked at that, and overall, no effect on certificates. Huge positive effect on transfer certificates. So some schools offer these certificates that are basically just kind of the general ed requirements for transferring to a 4-year school. And you just take what will be your lower division general ed requirements, and then you get what's called a transfer certificate. And I found really big effects on the number of students who got those transfer certificates before they transferred, or I think before they transferred. That was a surprising outcome to me. I wasn't expecting to see that, but it does seem like we're kind of changing how students are thinking about degrees maybe. Other questions? Good, that was a good one. Okay, so next we're gonna look at, are we seeing increases in the number of students who transfer, right? So one outcome that I think is super important is that students are getting associate's degrees. That's what we just saw is incredibly important societally, right? Like for our state, really important outcome. But we also care if students are transferring at higher rates, right? So what I have here is 3 years of data, which isn't actually enough, I think, to really tell us the full story, because students aren't, and other people who have looked at this have seen that students don't transfer immediately, right? Get the ADT and then transfer maybe in 1 or 2 years. But after 3 years of the policy being in place, we are seeing this marginally, but I think really practically important effect of more students transferring. So this is at the school level, that we see that over 50 students are being induced to transfer because of this. So it does seem like in year 4, which we'll have results from, in 6 months or whatever, I hope that we'll see an even larger effect in the number of students who transfer. Can't hang our hat on this yet, but I think this is trending, and it will be significant soon, that we are seeing more students transfer as an effect of this policy.
What are the years?
This would be, so it's kind of complicated because it depends on the years that the ADT has been in place. So the first 1 year out can only be, or could be 3 years out, sorry, it could be degrees that were started in 2012, and then we have 3 years of data for them. 1 year out can be a degree that was introduced in 12, 13, 14. Yeah, yes?
There are some reports out that show significant increase in ATDs awarded. A couple years ago, it was 12,000, 27,000 transferred, and up to 18,000 and maybe 8,000 or 9,000 transferred. So the ATDs are increasing, but the students that have those are actually transferring as intended to the CHUs it's not at the same pace.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that a little bit, and actually, your report was the one that kind of really got me thinking about this. Was that we're not seeing the transfer rates at the like students are getting more ADTs than we're seeing result in transfers. And I think there are a couple of things that could be happening here that we need more years of data to really probe into. One is that like it makes sense that there'd be some lag, right? If students don't transfer immediately, they're not going to show up in the system for a couple of years. 5 years out, I hope that we'll see kind of what will be the steady state effect. It could be, and this is a possibility, that the ADTs are going to make students more efficient so that we will see this kind of uptick in transfers, getting some of these like backlog students through the process more quickly, and then we actually could see the effect go down, right? That maybe in the long term this isn't going to have effect on transfers, and that we just see this kind of temporary effect that's really just about increasing efficiency, and then we see it go down. There's a story, and this is totally theoretical, but I think important to think about, is could these degrees actually reduce transfer in some way? And that could be because we're helping students, we're structuring the process so in some ways it's easier to get an associate degree by just giving students fewer options and making the path clearer. But then if students end up with the associate degree and say, well, that was a really hard process actually, like getting my associate degree wasn't that easy, transferring is going to be even harder, right? So are we giving students more information that will have the effect that we don't want, which is actually reducing transfer in the end by kind of giving students information that makes them feel like this will be harder than I anticipated in this kind of cooling out process. I don't know that I think that that's the case necessarily, but I think that is something to think about. Like, is this process giving students more information about themselves and about higher education that could have unintended consequences? Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
So I think that's a really big piece of the puzzle too, in terms of like how many are completing degrees and how many are actually going.
Right.
And of course it's once a year, and then the changes, like even for us, our college locally is San Jose State. The fact that they changed from 1 year to the next, prioritizing local students, which they hadn't for maybe the last 4 or 5 years, is a really, really big, significant change for our students. So I'm just curious, even at a regional level, with like impacted, not impacted campuses,
Yeah.
like how that will impact it, because I think that that's a really big piece of the question in terms of like the number that are getting their degrees and the number that are actually.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So I haven't looked at that specifically. I'll tell you a little bit how I've thought about that. But that's right. And I wonder if, I bet there are ways to kind of leverage that local information to figure out if having a CSU nearby with your major that is not capacity constrained, if that affects the transfer rate. That's a great point. And I think that's right. So you look at the website and you're like, this is the best policy I've ever seen, right? Like, it's so good. And then you like read the fine details and you're like, wait a second, like, I'm going to get into a CSU. That's asking, like, if I live in Southern California, like, and I get into CSU East Bay, is that actually a viable option for me? Is that something I'm going to do? Or is this just like, yeah, I can transfer and I got in, but is that actually going to happen? I think you're totally right about that. And the other thing I think is that, so it gives students this GPA bump, right? Like in certain situations, it can help students get into a CSU. I heard from one conversation with one person, and she said, we actually advise certain students not to do the ADT. If this is a student who is going to get in, no matter what, we advise them to get out of here as quick as possible, take some classes and transfer in and not get the ADT. So I think there's something that's happening is that certain students might be advantaged by this or are advised to kind of take advantage of it, but not across the board. And I think there's a lot of nuance there that's happening that I'm not picking up for sure and that you really need to know.
Well, if I can add to that idea
Yeah.
of STEM degrees, if this is not always the best, most viable option,
Yeah.
because they have so many prerequisites and so many science classes that it's really better for them to stay on that track.
Yeah.
And then a lot of campuses will have supplementary application process that allow them to. So I think it's true. I think it'll kind of change a little bit depending on what areas you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. Any other thoughts on that? Because this is, I think, really important. That right, this is this kind of blunt instrument we're using that for certain students in certain areas is actually not the kind of panacea that we tout it as. Yeah.
Somewhat related to that, I had a question about how the
Yeah, I can. Yeah, do you want to?
So it was a fairly, I'm Eric Skinner, I'm deputy chancellor of the and it was, we had an implementation group, we still do, called the Oversight and Implementation Committee, and for SB 1440, there was representation from our community college campuses, from our faculty leadership, also from the CSU campuses, the CSU leadership, and we had conversations there, and basically the criteria we used were, we wanted to focus on those majors with the highest volume of transfer. So the idea was let's streamline the pathways that students want to travel the most. Start with those. At this point, we've covered about 95% of the transfer volume pathway. But those were the early ones that were done. There's also a little bit of selection based on low-hanging fruit. Basically those majors where it was easier to develop a transfer model curriculum around it. And that's where the faculty leadership was really key to this. And they definitely deserve a lot of the credit for the success in this. As faculty leaders from the two systems came together and, as Rachel was saying, had discussions about what does a solid lower division preparation look like for these different disciplines. And so when they came together and where there was broad, easy, early consensus amongst faculty, they grabbed those and moved them forward. So it was that combination of both the volume and the ease of developing the teams.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else? That's better explanation than I would give. That's perfect. All right. So the next thing which I didn't tell you we were going to talk about was another thing that I said earlier was students were transferring with many, many more credits than they needed. And that was something that the state noticed and wanted to affect. So now I'm going to look at just from data from one district. And the next two outcomes are actually data from one district. And I think we need to take this with a grain of salt and in mind that this is not necessarily, the California community colleges are incredibly diverse, right? Like there are 112 of them and they're really different in the students that they have and the goals that they have. So I'm going to give us evidence from one district that I think in some ways we can think about how it would apply to other schools, but we can't say that for sure. So from this one district, which has a high transfer rate, looking at the number of credits that students have when they graduate with an associate degree, and we hope that that will decline, right? We hope that we see students graduating with an associate degree with fewer accumulated credits, so they're taking fewer unnecessary classes. It's going to be the ugliest slide I show you. It's the only one that's a boring table. But the important thing here is that we see a decrease, not statistically significant, so we can't say for sure, but a pretty large point estimate there that students were graduating with 13 fewer now you're definitely going to know what schools it is, quarter level credits, right? So rather than semesters. But this is 2.5 fewer classes, 3 fewer classes depending on the class. So students are graduating with many fewer credits than they were before as an effect of the ADT. And this, I think, now, and for all sorts of boring statistical reasons, I don't have a really large sample here because I have to be comparing exactly identical degrees with the same classes, and so it really reduces things. But if we see this continue, this I think is really important. We don't have enough seats in all of the classes. Getting students to take fewer unnecessary credits. Now, philosophically, we could talk about if it's good or bad to take a lot of classes that don't lead towards a degree. But if in this capacity-constrained environment, getting students through with fewer classes, I think, is important. So not conclusive, but definitely suggestive evidence that that's happening. And then this final question that I was answering was, do we see changes in the composition of students in these departments? So is there evidence that different kinds of students are enrolling in these departments? And so why I was curious about this, you could think of this having a couple of different effects. One thing that could be happening is that by streamlining the process, making this a lot simpler for students, we're going to help traditionally disadvantaged students get through more efficiently and get more degrees, right? Like take students who would have been derailed by all these options that we're giving them and help them to get towards a degree. Another story could be that the most advantaged students, students who are savviest, are the first to jump on board and are taking seats in these classes and are the ones who are really taking advantage of these programs. Same outcome generally, but I think really different story that we would care about. So how I'm doing this here is I'm going to show you, I think there are two important outcomes here. The first is, this is the average number of terms that students had been enrolled before enrolling in a class that counts for an ADT. This is important because at this time, no longer, but at this time, enrollment priority was determined exclusively by how many credits you had accumulated. You have more credits, you get to pick your classes first. So I see this significant increase in the number of credits that students had before they enrolled, which I think is an indication that there are some capacity constraints, that the students who have been enrolled longer can enroll first are taking up seats in these classes at higher rates. The next thing, and again, not really significant, but telling a story that could be troubling, this is the proportion of different races and ethnicities enrolled in these classes. So we have, or female, and then Asian, Latino, and white, the only groups that I had enough students to look at. And we see that the proportion of students who are enrolled in classes that count towards ADTs increased by about 3 percentage points. Not huge, but when you think this is a zero-sum game, right? If there's one group that's enrolling at higher rates, that means that definitely other groups are enrolling at lower rates. In these two schools, Asian students graduate at the highest rates, have the highest GPAs, transfer at the highest rates, they're the highest performing subgroup, and we see them enrolling at higher rates. I think this is something that we should pay attention to. This is one district, like I can't say that this is true across the state, but definitely if we think about who knows about these programs, who's being advised into them, who's helped kind of getting a pathway towards transfer, I think this is important to pay attention to, is who is taking these seats at the highest rates. This is the slide that you are probably not going to be surprised to hear the district has cared about the most. When I've talked to them, this is the one that they have the most questions about. That is all I have for you, but I think this is hopefully feels like a good story, that this is a really important policy that a number of states have enacted similar policies. I think there are 21 kind of weak transfer policies, 8 states that have really similar programs. This is the first state to have good enough data to look at if there's an effect. No other state has the longitudinal system of data that California has that allows us to look at this really causally. So this is the first evidence nationally of the effect of this policy like this. And we see that it's having an effect on associate's degrees. Like, we are seeing more students graduate. I think that's a really good story. And we're seeing evidence that more students are transferring, also a great story. I think we just need to continue to pay attention to who is taking these degrees and how are we making sure that kind of access to them is equitable across groups.